There is a specific kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep. You can get 8 hours and still wake up already behind. You can do everything right, show up, work hard, try to be a good person, try to keep your word, and still feel like your life is somehow running late to its own appointment. If that's you right now, I need you to hear this before you do one more thing today. You are not lazy, and you are not cursed, and you are not being punished. You have a compass problem, and not a clock problem. And by the time we're done here, you're going to understand exactly why your life feels stuck, no matter how hard you work. And you're going to walk away with one shift, one you can make today, that starts putting everything back in its right place. Stay with me, because I'm not here to make you feel guilty. I'm here to wake you up. Here's what nobody told you. Somewhere along the way, you quietly redefined busy as faithful. You didn't do it on purpose. Nobody sat you down and taught you that lie on a Sunday morning. It crept in one deadline at a time, one bill at a time, one crisis at a time, until the sheer volume of your responsibilities started to feel like proof of your devotion. You think, I'm doing all of this. Surely that counts for something. Surely God sees how much I'm carrying. And He does see it. He sees every ounce of it. But carrying a lot and putting Him first are not the same thing. That quiet, invisible gap between how much you're doing and where He actually sits in the order of it is exactly where your exhaustion is coming from. Not from doing too much, from doing it in the wrong order. This is not a rebuke. I want to say that clearly, right at the top, because I know how this kind of message can land. It can land like another voice telling you you're not doing enough when you already feel like you're barely holding on. That is not what this is. This is a reset. You are allowed to put this down and pick something up in its right place, starting today, without shame, without a lecture, without having to explain to anyone why it took you this long. God is not waiting for you to grovel your way back to first place in your own life. He's not standing over you with His arms crossed, tapping His foot, disappointed at how many years it's taken you to get here. He's just waiting for you to come home to the order that was always supposed to be there. That's a different posture entirely, and I need you to receive it as different, because the way you hear the next 50 minutes depends on it. So let's talk about order. Let's talk about the difference between a compass and a clock, because this is the picture that's going to carry us through everything else today. A clock tells you how much time you have. A compass tells you which direction to walk in. And here's the thing almost nobody says out loud. Most of us have spent our entire lives becoming experts at managing the clock, and almost no time learning to read the compass. Think about how much energy you've spent on time. Planners, alarms, calendars, productivity systems, apps that promise to help you squeeze more out of every hour. Think about how many books you've read on managing your schedule, how many mornings you've woken up and immediately calculated how many hours you have before the next obligation swallows you whole. And now think, honestly, about how little energy you've spent on order, on which direction you're actually walking in, on what gets touched first, on what sets the tone before the clock even starts ticking. You have been managing your clock beautifully and ignoring your compass completely. And a perfectly managed clock pointed in the wrong direction doesn't get you home faster. It just gets you lost more efficiently. You arrive at the end of the day having accomplished a great deal and still feel like you accomplished nothing that mattered. Because efficiency was never the thing that was missing. Direction was. That's the picture I want you to hold on to for the next hour, because we're going to come back to it more than once. The compass and the clock. Write it down if you need to. Put it somewhere you'll see it tomorrow morning, because most of your stress isn't a time problem. It's an order problem. And order problems don't get fixed by finding more hours. There is no version of your schedule, no matter how ruthlessly you optimize it, that will fix a direction problem. Order problems get fixed by fixing what goes first, and that is a decision, not a discovery. You don't stumble into it by accident one lucky morning. You choose it. Now, I want to take you somewhere in Scripture that most people skim right past, because on the surface it looks like a story about food. It's the story of manna in the wilderness in the book of Exodus. God's people are out in the desert, they have nothing, no fields, no stored grain, nothing to fall back on, and God starts providing bread from heaven every single morning. But here's the detail that gets missed. The instruction wasn't just that manna would come. The instruction was when it would come, and how much of it they were allowed to gather ahead of time. It fell in the morning, before the heat of the day, and the people were told to gather only enough for that day. Not to stockpile it, not to hoard it for tomorrow, because if they tried to save it overnight, it would spoil. Every single day they had to go out early, before anything else happened, and gather what they needed for that day only. Now think about what that actually meant for their lives. It meant the very first productive act of every single day. Before farming, before building, before arguing, before worrying about what came next, was going out to receive provision from God. Not because they had hours of free time. They didn't. They were surviving in a wilderness, raising families in tents, managing flocks, dealing with the same kind of exhausting, daily grind you deal with, just without air conditioning or a paycheck to soften it. It was because provision itself was structured to require them to seek first, every single day, or they simply wouldn't eat. God didn't leave first as a suggestion for the spiritually advanced. He built it into survival. Here's where I want to challenge something you probably assume, because I assumed it too for years. You probably think seeking God first means a long devotional life, an hour of prayer, deep study, something that looks impressive if someone watched you do it. Something with a journal and a highlighted Bible and soft music playing in the background. And if that's what you think it means, that belief is actually part of why you've stopped doing it, because who has an hour? You don't. Nobody watching this has an hour they feel they can spare before the demands of the day come crashing in. And if that's the bar, most of us will fail it before we even attempt it, and then quietly give up on the whole idea. But look again at the manna. God didn't ask for their whole morning. He asked for the first movement of it. A trip outside the tent before anything else got their attention. The size of the act wasn't the point. The sequence was the point. They gathered before the sun got hot, which is a beautiful way of saying, before the pressure of the day had a chance to convince them they didn't have time. That's the first hinge of everything I want to give you today. Seeking God first was never primarily about duration. It was about sequence. It's not asking you for the biggest slice of your day. It's asking to be the first thing your compass points to before the clock starts running your life instead of God. Let that sink in for a second, because I know some of you have been carrying guilt for years over devotional lives that never got off the ground, and that guilt was built on a false requirement. You weren't failing at faithfulness. You were failing at a standard God never actually set. Let's go somewhere else, because I want you to see this obstacle, the disguised priority obstacle, the busy equals faithful lie, actually named in Scripture, in a story you've probably heard 100 times without hearing the part that matters most. Luke chapter 10. Jesus is a guest in the home of two sisters, Martha and Mary. Martha is doing what a good host does. She is cooking, cleaning, preparing, making sure everything is right, making sure Jesus is comfortable and honored under her roof. This is not a small thing in that culture. Hospitality was sacred. Failing to properly host a guest, especially a guest like this one, would have been a real and public failure. Martha has legitimate weight on her shoulders. And Mary just sits at his feet and listens, seemingly unbothered by any of it. At some point, Martha can't take it anymore, and she goes to Jesus and basically says, "Don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me." Now here's what I want you to notice, because this is the part almost every teaching on this passage rushes past. Martha's activity was not sinful. Nobody was hosting Jesus wrong by cooking for him. The problem was never that she worked. The problem was what her work had quietly displaced. Stop serving. His answer in Luke 10:41-42 was that she was worried and troubled about many things. But one thing is needed. Mary had chosen it, and it would not be taken away from her. Read that again in your own life. Martha wasn't lazy. Martha wasn't unfaithful. Martha was busy in service of something good. Hospitality, honoring a guest. Doing right by her household, meeting a real and legitimate need. And it still displaced the one thing that actually mattered in that moment. That is the exact shape of the obstacle sitting between you and God right now. It's not that you're doing bad things. It's that the good things, the job, the kids, the bills, the responsibilities, the never-ending list, have quietly taken the seat that was supposed to be reserved for something else. You've been Martha, telling yourself that if you just get through this one crisis, this one season, this one deadline, then you'll finally sit down. But the kitchen never runs out of work. It never has for anybody ever in the history of kitchens. Later isn't a real place on the calendar. It's the name we give to the thing we've decided not to prioritize today, dressed up as a promise we'll keep tomorrow. And tomorrow inherits the exact same kitchen, the exact same list, the exact same pressure to keep cooking instead of sitting down. I want you to notice something else about that story, because it matters for what we're building today. Mary didn't leave the house. She didn't quit her responsibilities to the household forever, walk out the door, and abandon her sister to fend for herself for the rest of her life. She sat at his feet in that moment, in that sequence, before whatever came next for her that day. There's no indication Mary never helped Martha again. This is the compass again, not a demand that you abandon your life, your job, your family, your obligations, but a demand about what gets touched first inside of it. You are allowed to still be Martha for the rest of the day. You are just not allowed to let Martha get there before Mary does. There's a second picture of this same principle, and it comes from Jesus himself, which tells you this was never just an Old Testament wilderness rule for a people without modern conveniences. In Mark chapter 1, after a day of healing crowds, casting out what tormented people, meeting need after need after need until he must have been running on fumes, we're told something remarkable. Mark 1:35, and now in the morning, having risen a long while before daylight, he went out and departed to a solitary place, and there he prayed. Rising before daylight, not after the crowds had already found him again, not squeezed in once the demands of the day had already claimed his attention. Before daylight, Jesus, who had every legitimate reason to be exhausted, who had poured himself out for people the day before until there was nothing visibly left to give, still went out first into solitude before the sun and before the crowds to be with his Father. If Jesus needed the sequence to be right before the demands of ministry swallowed his day whole, what makes you think you're exempt? What makes you think your job is more demanding than his was? That your list is longer than the line of sick and desperate people who found him the moment he tried to rest. He wasn't seeking God first because he had less to do. He was seeking God first because he knew exactly how much he had to do, and he knew what would happen to him internally if he tried to do it without the order being right. This wasn't weakness on his part. It was wisdom. And it's the same wisdom being offered to you this morning, in whatever season of exhausting demand you happen to be standing in. Let's push this one step further, because I want to root it somewhere even more physical, more visual, something you can picture in your own home. In the book of Deuteronomy, God gives his people this instruction: write these words, these commands, on the doorposts of your house. Deuteronomy 6:99, you shall write them on the doorposts of your house. Think about what a doorpost actually is. It's not the deepest room in the house. It's not hidden away in a drawer where only you would ever see it if you went looking. It's the threshold. It's the very first thing that gets touched every single time someone enters or leaves. Nothing gets into that house, and nothing gets out of it, without passing that doorpost first. That's the picture I want burned into your mind. God was never asking to be squeezed in somewhere in the middle of your day, buried under 3 other things, wedged into whatever 15 minutes happen to be left over after everything more urgent has already taken its share. He was asking to be written on the doorpost, positioned at the threshold of everything, so that whatever else enters your day has to pass him first. Your phone enters your day. Your to-do list enters your day. Your worry, your responsibilities, your anxiety about the thing you haven't solved yet. All of it is trying to walk through that door, and none of it is inherently the enemy. The question was never whether those things get to come in. Of course they do. That's life. That's responsibility. That's what it means to be an adult with obligations. The question is what they have to walk past to get there. Right now, for most of us, the doorpost is empty. The phone walks in first, completely unchallenged before your feet are even fully on the floor. The to-do list walks in first, sets the emotional temperature for the whole day before you've even had a conversation with God about it, before you've had a chance to be reminded who's actually in charge of how the day goes. And then we wonder why the day feels chaotic, why we feel reactive instead of anchored, why we're managing our clock frantically and still ending up lost. It's because nothing was written on the doorpost. Nothing set the direction before the day started moving on its own momentum. I want to stop here for a second because I know exactly what some of you are feeling right now, and I don't want to keep teaching past it. Some of you are doing math in your head about how many mornings you've let slip by, how many years you've told yourself, tomorrow I'll start, how many times you've tried this exact thing, a new habit, a new devotional plan, a fresh start on a new year, a new journal you bought with good intentions, and watched it fall apart in a week or two, sometimes in a few days. And there's a voice telling you that this is just one more thing you're going to fail at, one more reminder of how far behind you already are, one more list of good intentions to add to the pile of ones you didn't keep. I need you to hear me clearly. You are not behind. Let that sentence sit for a second, because your whole nervous system might be resisting it right now, might be arguing with me. You are not behind. Behind implies there was a schedule you were supposed to keep, and you missed it, like God is somewhere checking a clipboard, disappointed in your timing, keeping a tally of every missed morning. That is not who He is, and that is not how this works. There is no scoreboard counting the mornings you didn't seek Him first. There is only today, and today is not a make-up test. It's just today. The compass doesn't ask where you've been walking for the last 10 years before it agrees to work. It only asks which way you're going to face the next time you take a step. That's it. That's the whole mercy of this. You don't need to fix the last decade before you're allowed to fix this morning. You don't need a clean record to qualify for a fresh start. So let go, right now, of the shame that says this is too late for you, or that you've tried and failed too many times to try again, or that this message is for someone earlier in their story than you. This isn't about willpower this time. It's about order. And order is something you can reset in a single decision. Today, without needing permission from your own history, without needing to explain yourself to anyone, without needing to feel differently before you're allowed to act differently. I want to speak directly to a few specific pictures of what too busy looks like, because I don't want this to stay abstract. Maybe you're the one who's up before anyone else in the house, not for prayer, but because it's the only window before the kids wake up that you can get anything done. Laundry lunches, a load of dishes from the night before nobody got to. You're not lazy. You are pouring yourself out for people you love before the sun even rises, and it's genuinely admirable. But somewhere in that window, the very thing that could actually sustain you through the rest of the day quietly got crowded out by the very people you're pouring yourself out for. Maybe you're the one commuting an hour each way, headphones in, replaying yesterday's problems or tomorrow's meeting the entire drive, because your mind never actually gets a moment where it isn't solving something. Maybe you're retired now, and you'd think that would mean you finally have the time, except somehow the days fill up anyway. Errands, grandchildren, doctor's appointments, a body that takes longer to do what it used to do quickly. And first, still keeps getting pushed to whenever there's a lull, and the lull never quite arrives. Wherever you are on that list, or somewhere else entirely, the obstacle wears a different outfit for each of us. But underneath it, it's always the same lie, that the good, legitimate, real demands on your life are too important to interrupt for 5 minutes with God. They're not. They're important enough that you can't afford not to. Now let's build the actual teaching that ties all of this together, because I promised you a shift, not just a feeling, and here it is. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus is teaching about worry, about food, about clothing, about all the things that keep people up at night, all the things that make us feel like we have to hustle and grind and manage every detail ourselves, or it will all fall apart around us. He points to the birds of the air, who don't sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet are fed, He points to the flowers of the field, clothed more beautifully than royalty, without ever spinning a single thread for themselves. And after walking through all of that anxiety, he lands on one sentence that has been quoted so many times it's almost lost its weight, printed on mugs and wall art, until we stop actually hearing it. So I want you to hear it slowly, like it's the first time. Matthew 6:3:30. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. Seek first. Not seek only. Not seek instead of working, instead of planning, instead of taking responsibility for your life and your family. Seek first. This is not a subtraction principle where God is asking you to remove everything else from your plate, quit your job, stop paying your bills, and wait around passively for bread to fall from the sky. This is an ordering principle. It's a promise about sequence, not a demand for isolation from your responsibilities. Notice the phrase that comes right after. All these things shall be added to you. Added, not instead of these things. Added. He's not asking you to choose between provision and prayer, between working and worshiping, between paying rent and pursuing him. He's telling you that when the order is right, the addition takes care of itself in a way striving alone never could. The things you've been white-knuckling, the job, the finances, the relationships, the outcome you've been trying to force into existence through sheer effort and willpower. Those don't disappear when God is first. They get added in their proper place once the compass is set correctly. You don't lose the things you're working for by putting him first. You finally get to stop carrying them alone. This is why your hard work hasn't been turning into breakthrough. It's not because you haven't worked hard enough. Some of you are working harder than anyone around you and still watching doors stay shut, still watching the same stuck patterns repeat themselves, still lying awake at night wondering what's wrong with your effort, what you're doing wrong, why everyone else seems to be moving forward while you stay in place. Nothing is wrong with your effort. Something is wrong with your order. You've been trying to add without seeking first, which is like trying to build a house by starting with the furniture instead of the foundation. It might look like progress for a while. You can decorate a room beautifully even without a foundation underneath it. Eventually it collapses though, because nothing underneath it was ever set in the right order to hold the weight of a real life. There's a piece of this verse that deserves one more moment, because it changes how you should think about the word kingdom. Here, and this matters more than it sounds like it might, seek first the kingdom of God isn't asking you to seek a place. Like heaven is a location you're supposed to mentally travel to for 5 minutes each morning before returning to earth for the rest of the day. Kingdom means the rule, the reign, the governing order of God, where he is actually in charge of the decision-making. To seek his kingdom first is to seek his governing authority over your day first, before you hand the steering wheel to your calendar, your anxiety, or your inbox. It's asking, in those first few minutes, God, you lead this today. Not God, please bless the plan I already made without you. Those are two completely different postures, and only one of them is actually seeking first. You can technically pray for 5 minutes every morning and still be asking God to rubber stamp a day you already planned in a direction you already chose. Seeking first means letting him set the direction before you've locked in your own. I want to be honest with you about my own life here, because I don't think this lands the way it needs to unless I tell you the truth about where this teaching actually came from. And it didn't come from a textbook. For years, real years, not a season, not a rough month I can laugh about now, I was a master of the clock and a stranger to the compass. I could tell you exactly how many hours I worked in any given week. I had systems for my time, calendars color-coded down to 15-minute blocks, mornings planned to the minute, all of it optimized within an inch of its life. And I was exhausted in a way that no amount of sleep ever touched, because I was pointed in whatever direction the loudest deadline happened to be pointing me that day. I told myself I would get to God once things settled down, once this project was finished, once this financial pressure eased up, once the kids were a little older, once the busy season passed, once never came, because it's not a real place. It's a promise you make to yourself so you can feel okay about not keeping it today. a way of postponing something without having to admit you're postponing it. What actually changed wasn't a bigger commitment. It wasn't suddenly finding an extra hour I didn't have. I never found that hour, and honestly, I still haven't, and I don't believe it's coming. What changed was the sequence. I stopped waiting to feel ready for a long devotional life and started giving God the very first movement of my day, even when that movement was small, even when it felt embarrassingly short compared to what I thought spiritual people were supposed to be doing. Even now, some mornings it still is only 5 minutes. And what I discovered, what surprised me honestly, because I expected the results to come from the size of the commitment, is that the size was never what was broken. It was the order. The moment God moved from somewhere in the middle of my day to the doorpost of it, everything downstream of that decision started to realign, not because the circumstances instantly changed, not because bills suddenly stopped coming or every door I'd been knocking on suddenly opened overnight, but because I stopped walking through my day, pointed in whatever direction panic happened to push me that morning. I started walking through it pointed somewhere, and that alone changed how the same amount of effort landed. I remember one particular morning, maybe 8 or 9 months into this shift, sitting in the same chair I'd sat in 100 times before, still facing a financial pressure that hadn't actually resolved yet, still staring down a problem that had been sitting unsolved on my desk for weeks. Nothing about the circumstances had changed in that moment, but something in me had. I noticed, almost like catching myself in an old habit, that I wasn't approaching the problem with the same tight, white-knuckled panic I used to carry into every difficult morning. I was still concerned. I still had work to do that day to address it. But underneath the concern, there was something steadier than there used to be. Something that didn't used to be available to me before the order changed. I don't think that steadiness came from having figured anything out. I think it came from having spent 5 minutes, before anything else, remembering who was actually holding the outcome. That's not a small thing. That's the entire shift, showing up quietly, on an ordinary Tuesday in a chair, in a problem that hadn't even been solved yet. So here is the shift. Here is the one thing I promised you at the very beginning, and I want to make it as simple and doable as I possibly can, because complicated instructions don't survive a real Tuesday morning with kids yelling and a commute waiting and a phone already buzzing before you've opened your eyes. Stop treating seeking God first as a feeling you're waiting to have. You are not going to wake up one day suddenly flooded with enough peace and enough time to make this easy. That morning isn't coming for you or for anyone else, no matter how long you wait for it. Instead, treat it as the first act of your day, a decision, not a mood. Before the phone, before the to-do list. Before you even know how you feel about the day ahead, because you don't have to feel ready to be obedient to the order. You just have to go first. Faith isn't waiting for the feeling of readiness. Faith is moving before the feeling shows up, trusting the feeling will catch up to the decision, not the other way around. And remember what we said about the manna and about the doorpost. First was never a measurement of size. It was a measurement of sequence. 5 minutes, spoken honestly to God before anything else touches your morning, is not a small act. It is the doorpost being written on. It is the compass being set before you take a single step. You are not required to build an hour-long devotional life to qualify for this. You are required to go first, in whatever size you can actually sustain, so that everything else that enters your day has to walk past that moment to get to you. 5 minutes done every single day will outperform an hour you attempt once and abandon by Thursday. Consistency of sequence beats intensity of duration. Every single time, in every area of life, and especially in this one. Picture it this way one more time, because I want this image to be the thing you carry out of here long after you've forgotten most of what else was said today. Imagine standing at the edge of a long walk, and in your hand you're holding both a compass and a clock. For years, you've been staring at the clock, watching the minutes, calculating how much time you have left, rushing to cover ground, exhausted from how fast you're moving, and still somehow arriving nowhere close to where you meant to be, wondering why the distance never seems to shrink no matter how quickly you walk. Today, put the clock in your pocket for just a moment. Just 5 minutes. And lift the compass. Let it settle. Let the needle stop spinning and actually point true before your feet move even one step forward. That single motion, setting the compass before you walk, instead of checking the clock while you're already lost and already exhausted, is the whole shift. It doesn't cost you the day. It orders the day. And once the direction is right, you'll find that the walking, the working, the striving you were already doing, the same effort, the same hours, the same responsibilities, finally starts moving you somewhere instead of just moving you. This is also why so many people quietly give up on this after a few days, and I want to name it so it doesn't happen to you. They set the compass on day 1. Feel a shift, feel encouraged, and then day 2 gets busy, and they tell themselves they'll catch the compass at lunch instead. And lunch gets busy too. And by day 5, the phone is walking through the doorpost again unchallenged, and they conclude the whole thing didn't work. It wasn't the method that failed. The order slipped back to where it was before, one skipped morning at a time, each one feeling small and forgivable in the moment. Guard the sequence more than you guard the size. A late 5 minutes is worth more than a perfectly timed hour you never actually get to. And a 5 minutes you protect for 30 days straight will change more in your life than a single powerful hour you experience once and never repeat. I also want to give you permission for something that might sound strange. After everything I've just said, it's okay if those 5 minutes don't feel spiritual. It's okay if some mornings it's just you tired, saying honestly, I don't have much today, but I'm giving you the first of it anyway. That honest, unimpressive 5 minutes is worth infinitely more than an eloquent, poetic hour you talk yourself out of because you don't have the energy to make it sound the way you think it's supposed to sound. God isn't grading the performance, He's honoring the sequence. He would rather have your tired, half-awake, barely formed first thoughts of the day than your polished, well-rehearsed leftovers from whenever you finally get around to Him. The doorpost doesn't require eloquence. It just requires being written on first. Let me also address the practical question some of you are already asking, because I know how your mind works after 20, some years of trying and failing to build habits like this. What do you actually do with the 5 minutes? I'm not going to hand you a script to read, because that would just be trading one performance for another. But here's a simple shape you can hold loosely. Start by acknowledging Him, not asking for anything yet, just acknowledging that He's there and that He's first. Then hand Him the day itself, in plain words, the way you'd hand someone the keys to a car before a trip. This is what's on my plate today, you lead it. Then, if there's a specific weight you're carrying, name it honestly without dressing it up, and then stop. You don't need to fill 5 minutes with words. Some of the most important seconds in that window will be the quiet ones, where you're simply present before Him instead of already mentally halfway out the door to the next thing. The shape matters far less than the sequence. Don't let the search for the right way to do this become one more reason to put it off. I want to take one more honest detour here, because there's a question that tends to surface right about this point in a message like this, and if I don't answer it out loud, it'll just sit quietly in the back of your mind and undo everything we've built so far. The question is some version of, what if I do this? What if I actually set the compass first every morning and my circumstances still don't change? What if the bills are still due? The diagnosis is still real, the relationship is still strained, and none of it magically resolves just because I prayed for 5 minutes before checking my phone? That's a fair question, and I'm not going to insult you by pretending the answer is that everything gets easy. It doesn't always. Some of what you're carrying right now may still be sitting on your desk in exactly the same shape a month from now, even after 30 straight mornings of doorpost prayer. Seeking first was never a magic formula that guarantees an easy outcome by Friday. Go back to Matthew 6:33 one more time. All these things shall be added to you. Doesn't come with a delivery date. It's a promise about direction and provision over the shape of a life, not a vending machine transaction where 5 minutes buys you an instant resolution. What does change, and change almost immediately, is what it feels like to walk through the unresolved thing. There is a version of you carrying that same unpaid bill, That same diagnosis, that same strained relationship, who is carrying it alone, managing it entirely on your own strength, white-knuckled and exhausted, checking the clock every hour to see how much time is left before it swallows you. And there is another version of you carrying the exact same weight, having handed the direction of the day to God before anything else touched it, who is not carrying it alone anymore, even though the circumstance itself hasn't moved an inch yet. That second version you is not naive. That second version of you is not in denial about how hard things are. That version of you has simply stopped trying to be the one holding the whole outcome together by sheer effort, because the order has been reset, and God, not your own striving, is now the one being trusted with the weight of it. The circumstance is the same. The exhaustion underneath it is not. And more often than most of us expect, the steadiness that comes from that reordering ends up shaping decisions, conversations, and opportunities in ways you wouldn't have made or noticed if you were still white, knuckling your way through the day on panic and caffeine alone. There's one more layer to this I want to give you before we close, because I don't want you to walk away thinking this is only about your individual mornings, as if the whole message stops at your bedroom door. When Abraham traveled, when he moved his family from place to place across the land God had promised him, there's a pattern that shows up again and again in the book of Genesis. Wherever he went, before he did much else, he built an altar. Not a house first. Not a well first, though he needed water. Not a fence for his flocks first, though he needed protection for what he owned. An altar. A place to seek God. Built before the rest of the settlement took shape around it. He wasn't waiting until his household was established to make room for worship. Worship was what established the household. The order there tells you something important. This isn't only a personal habit for private, quiet mornings. It's meant to be the first stake driven into any new season, any new chapter, any new place you find yourself standing in life. New job, new relationship, new city, new struggle you didn't see coming. Before you build the rest of it, put an altar there. Let the first thing that gets established be the one that everything else gets built around. I think about that pattern in Abraham's life, alongside another moment much later in Scripture, in the life of King David, because together they show you this principle doesn't just apply to brand new seasons, it applies to ordinary, repeated, unremarkable days too. Psalm 5:3 says, "My voice you shall hear in the morning, O Lord. In the morning I will direct it to you, and I will look up." Notice the phrasing, not "I will eventually get to you," not "I will fit you in when I can," but "On the morning I will direct it to you." David was a king. He had armies to command, a nation to govern, enemies actively plotting against him, a household full of its own complicated demands. If anyone had an excuse to push God to whatever was left over at the end of an exhausting day, it was David. And instead we find him directing his voice toward God in the morning, positioning himself to look up before he looked at anything else demanding his attention. This wasn't a man with less on his plate than you. This was a man who understood that everything on his plate depended on the order being right before he touched any of it. I want you to hold Abraham's altar and David's morning voice and the manna gathered before the heat of the day and Jesus rising before daylight altogether for a second. Because when you stack them like that, you start to see this isn't one obscure verse being stretched to make a point. It's a pattern running through the entire story of Scripture, showing up in a wandering patriarch, a king under constant pressure, a nation surviving in the desert, and the Son of God himself. Every single one of them, in wildly different circumstances, in wildly different seasons of demand and exhaustion, arrived at the exact same practice, whatever comes next. Let God come first. If it was true for all of them, in all of their very different kinds of busy, it's true for you too in yours. So here's what I want you to actually do, starting tonight or tomorrow morning, whichever comes first for you, whichever one you're reading or hearing this closer to right now, before your feet even hit the floor or right after, before the phone, before the noise, before the list starts running through your head uninvited, give God 5 honest minutes. Not a performance, not a perfect prayer with the right words in the right order. Just the first movement of your day pointed toward Him before it's pointed toward anything else. That's the doorpost. That's the manna gathered before the heat of the day. That's the compass set before the walk begins. That's the altar built before the house goes up around it. Do that tomorrow, and then do it again the day after. And stop keeping score of how many times you failed at this before. Because that scoreboard was never real to begin with, and it was never God's scoreboard in the first place. One last thing before I let you go, because I don't want the specificity of 5 minutes to become its own trap for some of you. If 5 minutes still feels impossible tomorrow, if the season you're in is genuinely that overwhelming, a newborn who doesn't sleep, a crisis at work that has you up before the alarm anyway, a grief that makes even small things feel enormous, then start smaller than 5. Start with one honest sentence spoken before your feet leave the bed. God, you go first today. That's it. That's the doorpost, written in the smallest handwriting imaginable, but written before anything else got there. The size was never the requirement. It was always the sequence. Don't let a bad definition of enough talk you out of the one thing that was never actually about being enough in the first place. And if you're someone who's already fairly consistent with a morning routine, who already reads, already prays, already has some version of this in place, let me speak to you for a moment too, because this message isn't only for the person just starting out. Check the order, not just the existence, of what you're already doing. It's possible to have a devotional habit that's technically happening every morning and still not actually be first, squeezed in after the coffee's made and the news app's already opened and the mental to-do list has already started running in the background while you read. Consistency of habit isn't the same thing as sequence of priority. Ask yourself honestly what actually gets touched first, not what's on your list of things you do each day. The order matters more than the checklist. If this reached the exact place in your life it needed to reach today, subscribe so you're here the next time we walk through a reset like this one together. Because the truth is, most of us don't need one big miracle nearly as much as we need to keep being reminded which direction we're actually supposed to be walking, over and over, on the mornings we forget. And if you know someone right now who's exactly where you were an hour ago, running hard, doing everything right, still somehow arriving nowhere, exhausted in a way sleep can't fix, send this to them. Not as a correction, not as a, you should watch this, just as someone handing another tired person a compass, because that's really all this was ever meant to be. You were never behind. You were just pointed in the wrong direction, working incredibly hard to get there faster. Set the compass first, and watch how much less exhausting the same road becomes.